So, Redhook, the creators of Darkest Dungeon 1 and 2, two of my favorite games, got acquired by BHVR Interactive, the creators of Dead by Daylight. Darkest Dungeon's fanbase is concerned, and quite frankly, so am I. From what I've read on BHVR Interactive's press release, and this game developer article by Brian Francis, it seems like this move has been months in the making and made to provide monetary stability for Redhook. This news comes merely 6 days after BHVR Interactive closed Midwinter Entertainment, a studio they also acquired, and its horror PvE game, Project T. The move to buy Redhook has been a part of a longer line of acquisitions including Fly Studio, makers of Too Far Too Late, Code Glue, now BHVR Rotterdam, and Sock Monkey Studios, with founding members most well known for working on The Escapist and Prison Architect, becoming BHVR UK North. The timing for me finding out about the acquisition was coincidental, since I was talking to some friends who occasionally play Dead by Daylight about the competitive scene. If you're unfamiliar, in a nutshell, Dead by Daylight is a 4 vs 1 game where 4 survivors trying to escape the one killer, both equipped with various perks and items. We were talking about how poor the balance is on the killer side, but also on the survivor side, and how the competitive scene is practically dead, looking at the esports scene especially. Despite the balance issues, Dead by Daylight is still surprisingly active to me, possibly because of the lack of competition and the amount of horror character integrations they managed to stuff the game with. It's unfortunate to me that Redhook had to resort to an acquisition, but I somewhat understand. It seems strange though, since Redhook co-founders Tyler Sigmund and Chris Bourassa, I hope that's right, Bourassa, said that they've been able to remain profitable despite economic downturns and have been interested in an acquisition for months. Darkest Dungeon 1 and 2 have been massive successes, but I never heard any news about developing Darkest Dungeon 3, and there's only so much DLC they can make for DD2 now that it's been out for a few years, at least on Epic. BHVR has also promised to give Redhook space to make their own games and remain with little to no interference, but the Darkest Dungeon subreddit and I are pretty nervous. BHVR stated that they're looking to become another titan in horror games, but they chose to lay off Midwinter and close Project T, not to mention 40 other employees, so there's a possibility that some of the indie studios I mentioned or future acquisitions might suffer the same fate. I'm also hoping that Redhook are able to keep their identity and not become BHVR Vancouver or something, since the branding is so iconic. The acquisition also reminds me of what's happened with Gearbox Studios in Risk of Rain 2. I don't play Risk of Rain, I didn't really follow the takeover, but here's my understanding. Hopu Games, two students who developed Risk of Rain and expanded to make Risk of Rain 2, sold the IP rights to Gearbox in 2022. As in, the two original Hopu developers did not stay on, Gearbox fully acquired the franchise and started working on it in their place. Selling the IP is honestly one of the better cases for indie developers, and good for them, but that's not usually the best case for games. Looks like Hopu is working at Valve now, so they got out in time to avoid Gearbox's DLC launch failure. Risk of Rain 2's Seekers of the Storm DLC had a notorious launch, rife with bugs and other issues. To be fair, they were working on an unfamiliar codebase, but Risk of Rain 2 fans were less than pleased to see new bugs introduced through an update to the base game, not even just the DLC. For example, Gearbox tied the game's physics to the frame rate, so the world ran faster on higher frame rates and slower on lower frame rates. Now, Take-Two, the owners of 2K Games and Rockstar, have purchased Gearbox from Embracer, the previous owners. In my opinion, it's just more corporate bureaucracy separating people who make the decisions and people who actually make the game, which isn't going to benefit Risk of Rain. I know Embracer isn't great though, so maybe being with Take-Two will be better in the long run. Here's a direct quote about the acquisition. Our acquisition of Gearbox is an exciting moment for Take-Two and will strengthen our industry-leading creative talent and portfolio of owned intellectual property, including the iconic Borderlands franchise and Strauss Zelnick. I think that's right, Strauss Zelnick, chairman and CEO of Take-Two. This combination enhances the financial profile of our existing projects with Gearbox and unlocks the opportunity for us to drive increased long-term growth by leveraging the full resources of Take-Two across all of Gearbox's exciting initiatives. God, I really can't stand the corpo talk. I mean, I get it, it's a press release, they're trying to sound good, but the corpo talk gets to me sometimes. I attended a Q&A session that Chris and Tyler hosted on the day the acquisition was announced, and here's a summary of their thoughts on the acquisition. They were not struggling financially, but wanted security and funding to be able to work on their next big project, since indie game development is rough right now, so is AAA, and they don't have the guarantee that their next project will be a success. Chris and Tyler are staying on the team, so hopefully the same thing that happened to Risk of Rain won't happen to Darkest Dungeon, where their leadership left and the entire ship sank. They are also keeping the IP, and don't plan on adding anything outside of Darkest Dungeon for BHVR Interactive to Darkest Dungeon, but they are open to having Darkest Dungeon characters appear in BHVR Interactive games again, like Dead by Daylight. They understand that some people don't want to directly support BHVR Interactive, but encourage fans to still buy Darkest Dungeon DLC, merch, and stuff to support the Darkest Dungeon IP and studio. They're still working on modding support, but the way they set up Darkest Dungeon 2 makes it a bit more difficult. So all in all, it sounds like Redhook is trying to keep as much of their identity as possible while ensuring their survival, but I'd find and follow the individual devs working at Redhook on their chosen social media platforms in case things go belly up. I'll be covering Darkest Dungeon 1 and 2 and the new Darkest Dungeon DLC coming out soon, but until then, check out my indie games playlist. Thanks, I'll see you next time.